Draft science video. Finally. Been a while. Anyway, so I promised this guy I would answer these questions. And, so I guess I'll answer the questions. Another guy emailed me about, the fact that he finds some of this intriguing, but he's really a quantum guy. And it's really, but he just concedes that maybe they're, pulling wool. And one of these questions right at the top just kind of brings that subject up with the two-slit experiment. So I was thinking how they're... So I guess I'll do question 2 first. The two-slit experiment pattern is different than what you drew. Well, no, it's not. How do you explain interference pattern observed in two-slit experiment? Again, their explanation is what we're talking about. My explanation is that electrons diffract light. Light comes in going one direction and goes out in another direction, based on the spin of the electron, and the frequency of the light coming in, obviously, which the electron already has to be compatible with. But that gets to the relativity question, so I'll get to that too. So anyway, and obviously I'm arguing that there's a field produced by all surfaces, and when you put two surfaces close together, the fields interact with each other. Therefore the pattern changes, and it's the arrangement of the electrons. Say if I had a big giant magnet, a magnet the size of my house, and I lined up 10-foot magnets around it to create the field lines. Those field lines would be very widely spaced because the 10-foot magnets would produce a repulsive force and an attractive force, and their neutral would be maybe 10 feet apart. Now if I use little tiny iron filings, I'll have a zillion little field lines. So the field lines are arbitrary. They're just based on the size of the masses you're aligning in the field. So if they're big masses in the field getting aligned, you'll have different field lines than if they're small masses being aligned. One way to put it. Because the big masses can't become small is the real trick. Small masses can become big, but big masses can't become small, kind of thing. So anyway, the same effect is there's a field lines, and it's the field lines that the electrons are lining up on. So you have a lot of electrons in one place, no electrons, a lot of electrons, no electrons, something like that. So the light gets diffracted on the field lines, it gets no diffraction off the field lines, that kind of thing. On, off, blah, blah, blah. But the real pattern is the pattern inside of the pattern. So anyway, here's the distortion part. When they describe the two-slit experiment, it's really about an opening, right? And then you put a slit inside the opening. Now what they'll never do is show you the single slit with an opening this big, and then just put a slit in it, you see. And then show you the results of, hey, look, we cut it in half, and look at the difference. Because that's really what it is. And if you do that, what you'll find is the only thing you've changed, you haven't changed the pattern at all. You'll still get the on, off, on, off, on, off. And the only thing you'll change is how bright the central maxima, the very center line is. And quite obviously the center line isn't going to be very, isn't going to be nearly as bright in the two-slit experiment because the center is blocked. And in the single slit it's not. So obviously it would be a lot of light would go right through the center in the single opening. So if they did, that's the one experiment that's whenever there's comparison between single slit and double slit, it's always, they're using half the volume of slit for the single slit. And when you do that, you kind of obviously, I think, fundamentally change. Because really the wider the aperture, the more lines you get, the more you reveal the lines. Obviously if you make the aperture too large, you won't get any because you'll blind it all out with the huge central maxima. It'll be so bright you won't see any of it. But the point is that there's more with a wider opening. And they always show the single slit with the most narrow possible opening, creating the least interesting visible pattern. And it's all about what's visible. I mean, you've spread it out so wide, it's so thin, it's a huge pattern, but it's so weak you can't see it. And so you only see this little thing in the, you know, 3 little marks in the middle, and you say, oh look, single slit is boring. Well, single slit isn't boring if you make it the same size as your double slit. So that's one of the biggest frauds, I'd say. Well, just on the surface, I can say that, yeah, I've never seen them do the experiment where they take the same aperture and then just put an impediment in the middle. Because that would demonstrate that the only difference between the two patterns is the central maxima is brighter. And in the two-slit experiment, you have the effect where you have 6 or 7 or 8 bars. With the blue light, it's like 16 bars. With red light, it's like 8 bars, I think. And then it decreases to nothing, and then goes 8 bars again, and decreases to nothing, and 8 bars again, and it gets weaker and weaker as it goes out. But the double slit creates bulges of pattern, and the math doesn't account for that at all. When they do the math is saying there's bright line, dark line, bright line, dark line, and it just have it degrade at a consistent rate. There's no bulges whatsoever in the math. So when they talk about their math does everything, no, their math doesn't do it, and it doesn't do it perfectly, and it isn't always right, and it isn't completely accurate. So it's just a bunch of crap. They're lying, frankly, because that's the kind of distortions when you're not telling the truth, that the math isn't describing the actual experiment, and when you use things like Huygens, and when you never describe the experiment with the same amount of light going through the aperture. Yeah, you can only call that distortion of the results to make the argument they're trying to make. They're distorting your view of the evidence to make it seem like there's a big difference when there's almost no difference. Okay. Why does light travel at a constant speed independent of the observer? Well, like I said, on its face, I answered this question in another channel, but on its face it's not a sensible question. The observer has nothing to do with what I'm doing. Somebody could be observing me and they can't change what I'm doing unless they're shooting radiation at me or doing something to interfere with me. And the point is relativity doesn't have anything to do with your association with something. It has to do with your speed relative to each other. And as you change something's speed, you change how it sees the world. Okay, how it interacts with photons changes. So an electron moving very fast is really interacting with, you could shoot red light and an electron moving very fast, and that electron's going to think it's some other kind of light, depending on which way it's moving, away from you or for you, towards you. It's going to see blue one way, and it's going to see radio waves the other way, let's say. It's all about speed. It's all about this spin idea. And so what changes is your perception of light. The light doesn't change, your perception of it changes. So if you're moving very, very, very fast into a flashlight beam, you will see the beam change color because you're going to encounter the frequency of the light at a higher frequency. The light won't get to you any sooner, in a sense. I mean, obviously, you're as you shorten the distance, it takes less time for the light to get to you, obviously. But what you definitely will see is that the light changes frequency. But obviously, the light didn't change frequency. You changed the frequency by interacting with it at a quicker rate, by adding more velocity to the equation of interaction. But it's about interactions. It's not about observations. There's no such thing as an observation of a photon. You either interact with one or you don't, but you can't observe one. All right. Photons only interact with electrons. The arrows you talk about that are made of, who cares what they're made of? Have you ever asked what a proton is made of? Have you asked what a quark is made of? Why would you ask what something's made out of? I'm saying it's the most elemental element. It's a photon, okay, except without a frequency. So photons, look, I can't help that they've given you a false perception of reality, but photons aren't wavy things. They're this. They're a thing, all right? And there's a row of them coming at you at a frequency. That's a beam of light. A row of things coming at you at a frequency. And they have a polarization, a shape. And so they're coming at you with a shape. That's light. And the point is gravity is exactly the same thing, except there's no frequency. There's one here, and there's one 10 minutes later, or there's one millisecond later. There's no, they're not in any kind of, they're not coming at a coherent machine gun rate, and therefore they can't be grabbed by an electron because they're not matching its spin. An electron can only grab a photon when two of them come in exactly at the same rate as its spin rate, exactly at a half cycle. So the light has to be a half cycle to the spin rate of the electron for it to grab two quanta of light. So a photon is really two quanta, two gravitons. But what they're made out of? They're made out of the fundamental element blah blah blah. They're a fundament. They're made out of fundament. Shit. Where do you come from? Where do they come from? Well, let's ask guys, where does the universe come from? Who the fuck knows? Who the fuck, you think you're going to answer that question? You realistically, you think there's going to be an evidence trail you can follow with your to answer that question? Your physicists aren't going to be able to answer that question. There's no evidence trail to follow. There's no way to get to the source. So where do they come from? Fuck you. I mean, that's just a stupid question. I mean, you could ask that to any physicist, and he's not going to give you a fucking rational answer. Where does the universe come from? And they're going to say something like, well, it comes from empty space. Oh, okay. I mean, I could say something stupid like that. You want me to say something stupid? Why are they traveling? Because they are. I mean, again, why is a photon a photon? I mean, I can't. This is a stupid question. Sorry, it's a stupid fucking question. There's no point in asking those questions because there's never going to be a way to answer them coherently. You can only answer them with some abstraction of a guesswork at what possibly... I mean, I've described the universe as, yes, the universe is a vast nothing. But the truth is, error still exists. The possibility of error existed, and it erred. And it made matter. Matter is a fracturing of nothing. When nothing fractures, it turns into a photon. There. Is that an answer? It's an answer, but I don't think it's right. It could be. Why do electrons, protons, neutrons, and other particles have mass? Well, why again? Why? What does this have to do with my theory? This is just stupid. I mean, I think. But mass is a... the distinction between something that has mass and something that doesn't have mass is orbit. So as soon as you create an orbit, as soon as one thing is flying around another thing, quanta-wise, then you have something called matter. Because now it has a directional vector in all directions. All of its energy is now caught in a go-nowhere situation. So essentially it's trapped energy. So when energy is trapped in a spiral, a circle, that's matter. Now it has something called mass, because now it can absorb and emit energy. Alright. Why do they have different masses? Because they have different sizes of orbits and different amount of stuff caught in them. But really the difference in mass comes down to, as Einstein said, E equals mc squared. The mass is directly related to the energy element, and the energy element is the arrow, the fundament, the quanta. One quanta, one mass element. And if you think about a photon, for example, it's a one mass element, but all of its energy is in just one direction. It has no mass in any other direction but the direction it's moving in. So it's a one mass element, but all of its mass is in one direction. Alright. Why are only some materials magnetic if arrows are passing through all things? Well, the magnetic thing, as pointed out, is a consequence of polarization. So again, that's like asking why aren't all gravitons polarized? Well, because it's a filtering process, and the only way they get polarized is get caught up in, it's like a galaxy. A galaxy has a plane that it's circling on. It's not a round spherical thing, it's a plane, so it has a shape, a spin shape. I knew that was going to happen. I'll be back. Back. So I think we were at why are only some materials magnetic if the arrows are passing through all things? Yeah, well, it just has to do with this arrangement thing, the flat thing. Because the flat thing sort of creates a polarization. It's So let's just say that all gravity comes in all polarization. So you could go 360 degrees and a bunch of lines going through it, you can imagine. And the point would be is your likelihood of affecting mass, a thing, an orbit, is dependent on how the gravity hits it and what plane it hits it. So if it's coming at it, spinning towards it, it can't affect it. It can only affect it on its on its perpendicular angle. And it's converted. So anything going in one way will come out one way, depending on what it hits in a plane. So it's polarization is really the key word. And gravity works based on it, but everything's unpolarized, so to speak, in the gravity world. And it's when polarization is maximized, when you filter for certain polarizations. All the polarizations are there in gravity, it's just they're not filtered. And what happens is the mass filters. So what comes in is chaotic, what comes out isn't as chaotic, it's filtered. And through that process you create magnetism. And so there's certain elements that create, that have all their spins segregated. So everything spinning this way would be on this side, and everything spinning this way would be on that side, kind of a thing. And it's almost like creating a current inside of the thing itself. These electrons will migrate through that, and it's the movement of electrons. Also, when electrons are moving, that's when they become polarized, in the sense that they have to roll to move. They're rolling. So the idea would be, if an electron's going that way, towards you, yeah, it could be rolling this way or this way or this way or this way, but it can't be rolling that way or that way or that way. And that distinction means that it will polarize in just one direction, because it can only roll one way. Try to get that be more clear. But that's why electricity and magnetism are forces that are perpendicular to each other. It's through the tangent that you create the effect, because the head-on collision has no meaning, and the rear-end collision can't happen. You can't hit a photon with a photon in the ass. You just can't do it. Yeah. So you can only do the tangential interactions, and the tangential interactions create a filtering process. That creates the effect of magnetism, which is it's a magnifying of a force already existing, gravity. You're just magnifying gravity. You're focusing it by polarizing it. And there's, I explain this in the videos, but I mean, the effect is created by doubling the effect when it's polarizing and negating the effect when it's not. So 0 plus 2 equals 2, 1 plus 1 equals 2. So you can kind of see there's no gain or loss. It's the same thing. So by doubling and negating, you do the same thing as having 1 and 1. So it's just a way of converting gravity into a all double force or a nothing force in 50-50 proportions. So you always have the conservation law, but I mean, you'll basically magnify the effect by focusing the polarization. Probably good enough. How do you explain event horizon of black holes? Well, the theory of black holes is broken. The idea of something everything has this event horizon, this escape velocity, you could argue. But beyond that, the synthetic black holes that they make mathematically presume infinite gravity. They don't presume that there's any, like a constant, like the speed of light, where you can't get any heavier, so to speak, where if you added more mass, you stop making more gravity because there's nothing to make it out of, so to speak. So their synthetic math creates an event horizon that's synthetic. It doesn't have anything to do with reality. And in reality, yes, the speed of light is a constant. You can't break it. But there's no event horizon, even in their theoretical sense. There's no, you don't suspend somewhere. You are annihilated by moving the speed of light. So before you get to the event horizon, your velocity, because you had to have some initial velocity to be heading towards the black hole in the first place, your velocity is already going to be the speed of light, which means your mass will have already converted all into light. So there won't be any U long before you get to the event horizon. There will be no U. You'll just be a beam of light. But again, theoretically, their presumption is that gravity is an infinite force. It's not. You can't make the well deeper and deeper. The gravity is being created by an external pressure, and there's only so much external pressure. So if I have 100 pounds of pressure around me, and I open a valve, or in a bag, I have 100 pounds of pressure in a valve, in a bag, and I open the valve, well then the pressure will reduce to 50 pounds, and 40, and 30, and then eventually goes to zero, because I run out of pressure. Well, that's what happens with a supermass, is once you get to a supermass point, you have a lot of gravity, but you can't gain anymore. So it doesn't matter whether you're this big or this big. Once you've maximized the gravity, you can't get any bigger. And I guess I would argue theoretically it can't happen unless you're a hollow anyway. Because once you create maximum gravity, you lose all the gravity affecting the things in the center. So if you create a mass so large that it blocks out all gravity, this center would have no gravity, and the gravity is technically, magnetized gravity, polarized gravity, is what holds atoms together. So the atoms themselves wouldn't be able to be held together, they would fly apart, and the thing would explode. So I think you could probably say that even supernovas, all this their cause is because you've exceeded gravitational limits, and unless you do create a donut, unless you create a ring of mass, because a ring will allow you to have a wall without creating a problem for the stuff inside, because you won't affect the gravity on the things on the inside. You can't do it. So unless you have a hollow sphere or a ring, you can't create a supermass. Alright, how do you explain Mercury recess? Well, it's process. Again, it's not Mercury's process, it's the precession of the sun. So that's all that Einstein contributed, was a recognition that the sun is wobbling. Brownian motion, you could argue. It's being wobbled by all these other things affecting it also, and its wobble in its orbit is affecting the other planets in terms of changing the gravity, but it's a very subtle effect the further away you get. So that little wobble doesn't mean much over, it's like if I move a foot over a mile distance, a foot doesn't mean much. But if I move a foot over a 10-foot difference, it means something. So obviously the sun's wobble means something to Mercury, but it really doesn't mean much to the other planets. But that's all it's really about, is Einstein recognized that the sun wasn't stationary. The previous math assumed a stationary sun, and that presumption was wrong, and Einstein just made the sun reactive, and by doing that changed Mercury's orbit correctly. Why is the universe expanding, says you? It's not. Another mistake physics makes is that it assumes something, like it has an understanding of something. So redshift is the main reason why they think the universe is expanding. But they don't really understand what redshift is, and that there's two mechanisms that create redshift. The first mechanism being what direction I'm moving, and then how fast I'm moving. So if I'm moving away from you, I'm going to become redshifted. And just because as I drop my light, the frequency gets wider and wider. So if I'm dropping marshmallows out of the trunk of my car, and I'm going 30 miles an hour, the distance between the marshmallows will be a certain distance. If I go 40 miles an hour, then the distance gets bigger. If I go 70 miles an hour, the distance gets even bigger. So that's one form of redshift. I'm moving away. The light I'm depositing is going to have a wider frequency. The second one is time dilation. the faster I start going, the slower my metabolism goes, and now when I produce my light, I'm moving even slower. So now my arm's moving slower. So the car's going 50 miles an hour, plus the faster I go, my arm starts moving slower to dump the marshmallows out. So there's two elements that create redshift, or blue shift. And those two elements aren't being accounted for in physics, so they're miscalculating the speed of things, and obviously assuming a recession when they're not recessing. Presumably, this is realistically I'm arguing, something could be going perpendicular to you at a very high speed, and it would appear redshifted. So even though it's not coming at you, it's just going perpendicular at a very high speed. It'll still be redshifted because it's still that arm thing. Its arms are still dumping the light in all directions at a slower frequency. So one redshift matters when it's coming towards you. The other redshift matters, doesn't matter which way the thing is moving, it's always going to be redshift. So time dilation redshift exists no matter what direction you're moving. So anyway, so that's their mistake. So the universe technically could still be expanding, but it's not expanding nearly as much as they think. And I mean, obviously explosions expand. Duh. If there was a big bang, one would assume it's still banging a little. There's no evidence of a recession yet, so I mean a collapsing of the universe. But the expansion is not at the rate they think it is. How old is the universe and why? Well, this doesn't really have anything to do with my theory. See, I mean, unifying fields has nothing to do with how old the universe is. It really has absolutely nothing to do with it. I mean, finding the fundamental particle and recognizing its creation of all energy in all fields, really, like I said, how old the universe is, who cares? I would say that it's a good deal older than they think it is. Yeah, and twice as old. But I'm not going to waste a lot of time with those kind of theories. But again, we're back to this argument, this presumptive argument, that if you can actually see the thing, let's see how to put this, the light you're receiving, the thing had to take time to get to the point where you're receiving it from. So if we're seeing light that's 15 billion years old, it took 15 billion years for the thing to get to where it made that light. We're not looking at it back in where it was in one place somewhere. We're not looking back into a narrower hole of the Big Bang. We don't see everything clumping together. It's 15 billion years old. We don't see it all in one spot. So obviously it already spread out. So there's already a bunch of time that it took for the things to get spread out, for us to see light from different locations. So the very fact that we're seeing 15 billion year old light from different locations means that it took time for them to get to those different locations, so that the universe would have to be a few billion years older than whatever age that light is. You're not seeing the Big Bang. You're seeing stuff that's already formed. So it has to be after the Big Bang. Why are there only 2 electrons in first orbit and 8 in the next orbit? Well, I mean, that's just one of these obvious arguments. You know, there's not enough room for the electrons. The electrons don't like each other. So they have to be just 2. You know, they're, I hate you, 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 you know. But if you have more space, then you can have more of them, because now they can be I hate you distance away. Right? So the bigger I make the circle, the more I hate you distance. So the Planck constant is the I hate you distance. The Planck constant is the magnetic repulsion or electrical repulsion between the electrons. That's the Planck distance. So wherever the orbit is, there has to be a Planck difference between the subsequent orbits and the subsequent particles. So that's why the orbits get bigger, is because the repulsion distance gets smaller relative to the size of the orbit. So the bigger the circumference, the more things you can put in, because the things have that Planck repulsive distance is what decides how many fit. Yeah, it's simple enough. Why causes radioactivity? Why does? Who's on second? I don't know. Isotopes. Why causes radioactivity, and why does it happen in specific isotopes? Well, those are unstable elements, so they have a a ton of electrons in these huge orbits. Now, so you can imagine that anything that comes in from the cosmic rays, all this gravity, all blah blah blah, anything that's affecting them, the connections to the internal dynamic, the proton, is getting weaker and weaker. The only thing holding them to each other is their connections to each other, and so they're just in very weak bonds to the atom. So they're just constantly being disrupted by the cosmic energy, gravity even, affecting them, shooting through them, and it's just, they're very easy to disrupt. So the wider the orbit gets, the weaker the bond to the protons, and the more likely you are to kick one off really easy. Kick a quanton off. Let's see, causes reaction happen in isotopes. Why is the rate of decay constant for a given element? Well, because the rate of that, the size of that orbit and the amount of junk in it is the definition of the element. So how many things are in that outer ring is the definition of the element. So there's a consistency in terms of the error rate or the fragility rate based on the number that's in there. The higher the number, the likely the more fragile it is. But you also have to go with the idea that there's a certain numbers will probably be more tolerant than even numbers, that kind of thing. In terms of the connections are also between each other. So it's like putting a bunch of magnets together. Certain arrangements, positive numbers will work, a negative number won't work. So there'll be more stable and less stable orbits depending on the number, odd or even. Why are noble gases inert? Well, that just has to do with the fact that there's the system doesn't leave that Planck opening. So the electrons are so perfectly aligned, and that they're exactly the distance of the Planck distance, let's say. So if you're exactly the distance of the repulsive force, there's no in, so to speak. If something goes in, it just gets popped out again. The other one pops out. So it's just the reflexive action. So you can almost think of it as resonance. Once you achieve a certain perfect symmetry, that symmetry is just difficult to disrupt. Only through a special kind of hurting can you make it break that symmetry, because it's its tendency once it's locked into it. So once you have a rope moving at a certain frequency, you have to do a lot of crap to break it. Why are there only 2 electrons in first state orbit? So it causes rarity gases inert. Why are other elements not? Well, again, this just has to do with how perfect the balance of forces, the attraction and repulsion forces, the magnetic forces between the electrons, the protons, and the neutrons. So the more balanced that circumstance is, the less likely you are to be able to inject something else into it and create an interaction. White light is a mixture of many frequencies and polarizations. Well, polarizations are irrelevant. How can multiple of your arrows exist are same? Oh man, these are really bad sentences. You posted this 7 times, different places, and didn't fix this. How can multiple of your arrows exist are the same places and same time? Sorry, I don't know what that means. How can multiple of your arrows exist are same places and same time? There's no such thing as the same time. It just isn't. Time is... can't... As soon as something moves, time happened. And so, I don't even know what that means. Obviously things don't exist in the same place. White light is a mixture of frequencies and polarizations. How can multiples of your arrows exist? I just don't know what that means. I'm just saying, look, the only difference between gravity and photons is frequency. Take away frequency and you have gravity. Gravity can still be polarized. So I don't understand your question. Do you have any experimental evidence for your theories? Well, the point is do physics now have any experimental evidence for their theories? They have the thinnest, crappiest evidence you can imagine of their theory of wavy photons. They have the two-slit experiment. It's not evidence of anything. They're not even telling the truth about the math, not revealing exactly what does happen. And certainly there are evidence of photons being bent by gravity, as thin as it could possibly be. It's terrible evidence. I guess we go on and on. I'm saying the experimental evidence, I think, you have to do it by the same process. I mean, you know, having a unification theory isn't going to give you a better video camera to videotape gravitons and photons. You still can't videotape them. You can only understand their interaction. But I'm just saying that once you figure out that there is these proportionalities, that there is, I'm saying the theory is so consistent with the experimental results, the fact that gravity is induced, the fact that magnetism is induced, the fact that electricity induces magnetism. The whole induction argument is so consistent with my argument. This is an existing force that you're tapping into. That's why it takes time. That's why there's an induction involved. Is because it has to polarize an existing force. An existing energy has to be polarized. And it's the rate of polarization that is the induction of the force. So there's lots of evidence like that that's going to be very, and like I said, it satisfies all of these. It gives you a material explanation rather than the woo-woo explanation of empty bent space tells matter what to do, and it gives it magical energy. Magical energy pushes the earth into the sun. I'm giving you a real material source of the thing that makes the sun go into the sun, the earth go into the sun. Do you have any mathematical evidence? Well, all the existing math is okay, except for a lot of it is broken. Like I said, the two-slit math is crap. Huygens, the idea of these fake waves being created, these microwaves, well, whatever, these infinite waves created by every source of a wave imaginable. I mean, it's a completely contrived pile of shit. It's absolutely, it doesn't happen in reality. It's a mathematical trick. So I don't think math is the source of the truth. Math is a source of mistakes if you don't understand the limitations to the math. The math says gravity can go for an infinite amount. You can create an infinite amount of gravity. There's no evidence of them ever creating anything close to an infinite amount of gravity, or it existing anywhere. So I'm saying those are all canards of math, of bad math. Math is just a formula describing a circumstance, and you can have math that is incomplete, that doesn't have enough variables, that hasn't accounted for all the effects. So I don't know what exactly do you want me to give you. I'm telling you E equals mc squared is damn good math. I'm saying to you that the quantons of energy, that is, they had, like the photon, they have all their energy in one direction. Those things are the fundament, and you add up how many of those things you have trapped in a place, and that's a mass, and it has a certain potential to affect based on how many of them there are and which way they're moving, and how balanced the movement is, whether they have a velocity or not. So I don't know what to tell you, but I'm not going to be changing, you know, Newton's force laws. I'm not going to be changing a lot of Einstein, except I'm going to tell you that the field equations are too convoluted. Whether they're accurate or not, the math is too abstract. Have you tried to measure anything to match your theory? I don't know what you want me to do. I tried to measure anything. What am I supposed to measure? Yeah, like I said, I can tell you that gravity exists. There, I did the experiment. And I'm saying that gravitons did that. More moving this way than moving that way. The Earth blocked a bunch of them. So the little screw said, there's more shit pushing me one way than pushing me the other way, so I'm going the way there's more shit moving. I'm going with the flow, so to speak, of the force. And those force fields are everywhere. Those force fields cause all movement. I don't know what math you want me to give you. I'm telling you that the speed of light is a true constant. Nothing goes faster or slower, and the only thing moving in the entire universe are these little quanta. The quanta are the only thing moving, the little bits, the little gravitons, the photons. Everything else isn't doing anything because it's made of the little things that are moving, so the little things have to move. If the school of fish had the shape of Richard Nixon's face, by its swirl. And the school of fish moves from here to here. Well, Richard Nixon's face didn't move. The individual fish moved. That's how the universe works. Okay. So, and they moved at a constant speed, because they only go one speed. So they moved the speed of light to get from here to here. They just did it by going this way and this way and this way and this way. They went a lot of different ways, the speed of light, but they went more that way than all the other ways. And that's why Richard Nixon's face moved. My hand moves because all the little bits inside of here were moving the speed of light, and a tiny fraction more of them went that way than all the other directions. That's it. Till next time.